Very, very easily. It's we did a trip down here for the day.
Easy to do. I was going to talk with my mask on, but I will take that off.
I realised I forgot to bring one in. So
no, thank you. So could you please, now nobody else but me has read it, so we're just coming for the sale.
Shucks.
No. Could you please tell us a little bit about the storyline, because it's actually a hard one for me to talk about now, because so much happens within such a tight frame.
Yeah, so it's the story of set kind of early 2020 Sydney, so around standard time, like around now. And it's the story of four men, essentially. The story starts, they're going for a night out on the town, having a bit of fun. But as the night goes on, it becomes very clear that something is off with one of the guys in this group of friends. There's something not right about it. And so the story is how the other group of friends in this, this group of mates just struggle to ask the question, how are you? Are you okay? So it's a story essentially about how men talk to each other, is kind of the best way to describe it. And the honesty that is how difficult often people have, especially men, talking to other men around being honest with one another is kind of the crux of it. It's not all a downer, by the way. It's not all about...
No,
there's lots of...
It's a serious book. It's absolutely, it's so much fun as well, and there's funny bits in there too.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun kind of creating that space, and because it started in a similar space for me too. Kind of began as a short story at university, and it was whenever I was kind of at university studying stuff like that, a lot of my male friends would have problems with mental health all the time. It was kind of a regular thing that would happen, and they didn't know how to tackle the topic or speak out about it. It was a very difficult thing for them to talk about.
Oh, I've been thinking about it all day today, and really, men just do not have the outlets. I think it was only just last week I saw a dad saying to his boy, the boy's stacked and really hurt his knees, and the boy's just sitting there crying. He's like, "Come on, mate, up you get." And I think it'd probably be a dying regret of mine that I didn't go and say, hey, now we don't talk to our sons like that. Instead I just went up and was nice to him, and but then I thought that's even more conforming to the social norms of a woman will pat you down and make you feel good, and a man will pick you up and get back on the horse, and it was just horrible to watch, and horrible really that our society hasn't changed, and this is the way that we grow up. I think it's a real tragedy. I do think there is some change happening in the last but only in the last kind of couple of years, probably in the time of COVID that we're in now, because you have people who are isolated, they're by themselves. So that kind of mental health side of things is very much front and center. In the past, I think a lot of people have taken the approach of sweep it us under and carpete, just not kind of tackle the subject and kind of approach things with a she'll be right attitude. But come on, mate,
up your pop.
He was 4 if he was a day. He was such a little boy.
Exactly. But these days, I think it's I do think we have a long way to go. But I do think it's improving. I do think we are getting better.
I think we have a big group of men who sit out the front on Monday, Wednesday and Friday, and I think that's a big group, and they're always talking to each other. They're retired policemen. And really they could just be at the pub with beer. Instead they used to walk, they seem to have scaled back on the walking and the swimming. But they're out there with the fresh air, the chat, the laughter, they make each other laugh. I think they're few and far between, because most people do recognise them as not normal.
But would that have been because of their occupations, that they had to share so much within their occupation?
I think so.
And they have seen some horrendous things in their lives. So,
I was going to ask...
a few more guys were being more sensitive about things, I'd say over the last 20 years.
It's funny, because my normal, in kind of my day-to-day work, I get to interview a lot of authors and people within the space.
In Utopia, and he's the interviewer, and
podcaster.
social media podcaster
Yeah.
extraordinaire.
Yeah.
So we're doing an
Oh,
author
you
chat,
come in.
Ian.
Please come in. You're welcome to come in. Hello.
Ian's an author as well. He does poetry.
G'day, Ian. How are you?
Yes. No, you're after a coffee and I cannot provide. Next time.
Would you come and sit in and listen?
Yeah.
Come and listen.
I'm not scary. Don't mind.
Not scary at all.
Yeah. But it's. I've been lucky enough to chat to quite a few people who have a bit more familiarity on this subject, more than I do at least.
Yeah.
And one of the ones who kind of really stuck out was Clementine Ford dropped her new book recently called How We Love.
When I was chatting to Clementine Ford.
Yeah. And she actually, we kind of asked this question of her. She said, "Are you seeing a change?" Because if you see her online, she is often really out there, and if she sees a bloke behaving like an idiot, she will call him out, she will tell him off,
I thought
she'll
of her
post his
actually.
stuff
She
all
would
over the
have
place.
Gone up to the dad straight away and just
Yeah.
called it. Yeah.
But talking to her normally, she's actually a very lovely, articulate person to talk to, and she has said that in the last 12 to 18 months, she's actually seen a lot of men reaching out to her, not to be in that way that would be in kind of a vilification of someone as a feminist, but instead actually talking about the struggles that they've been going through. And she says that she's starting to see a change, at least from her side of things. So I think there is a change happening.
As Anna knows, I was in education for many years, and it was something that was in the personal, what do they call it? PD, health PA, to try and get people to be aware of this, and particularly the boys.
Yeah.
And what we actually, you had already left, we actually did a few little, shall I say, experiments where we put the really bright girls in one class and the really bright boys in another class, and they had to learn to compare to each other, and the boys had to learn to communicate in a totally different way to what they were used to communicating. It was quite fun. We did it in science as an experiment to see about their grades.
What would the boys do if they just?
So where the boys would be, what shall I say, hopeless in science, and let the girls just, top them, because they were separated, then the boys started to communicate more in their little groups, because there was basically the old science labs had 10 little tables, 10 workbenches, so therefore they would actually be in their group, and they actually had to work with each other. And then we'd mix the groups around. You never had to worry about the girls about that, they just did it. But the boys you had to, and if the boys were in class with girls, I don't know if you ever noticed it, and girls were with them on the bench, the boys didn't do anything, they let the girls do it all. Did you ever notice that?
No, but I was in humanities.
Oh, okay, alright, yeah.
Yeah, I was a humanities boy as well.
And I think changes were coming then.
I know I have 3 younger brothers, and they seem to have no problems talking, and they're really nice, and not that these guys here aren't nice, but I think it's definitely a change that we're seeing as hopefully is.
And I think it also comes from the parenting.
Yeah.
That's one of the big things, the parenting that you had. Because my brother, he was one of 3 girls, he was the only boy, but he's a very sensitive soul and will talk.
Yeah.
And I think that's parenting.
There's always the problem of generalising.
Yeah,
I'm
I
interested
know.
in your plot, like you've developed, your 4 characters. What are their backgrounds? Are they a broad cross section of the community, or are they a special group?
Yeah, so
Your plot.
it was interesting with these characters, because originally I thought when I started this book it was just going to be a short story and these characters were there, and I was lucky to actually meet a publisher one day, and he read the short story and I said, there's a novel in this, and what is it's doing it are these characters. So the main character, Chris, who is the narrator and who you see the story through, he's kind of a bit of a sheep. He kind of he'll follow the pack essentially to begin with, and over the course of the story he kind of develops his own ways of thinking and looking and perceiving things. The second kind of character is this bloke Logan, who is kind of a bloke, he tried to get into the military. He's the bloke who's kind of come back, they're reuniting, and kind of the main guy who's been away for a while when they're going out on the town but had to have a bit of fun. He's kind of become, he's a lean, mean, turned into a lean, mean fighting machine in 12 months. But there's something. This is the one who there's something off about him.
Yeah.
When you go for a night out, and the third character is a bloke called Jock, and I think about 100 Jocks in my life.
Yeah.
There is so Jock is the kind of character who takes the she'll be right sort of mentality. He's kind of a blokey bloke. He plays footy on the weekend. He turns up in a rugby jersey, and he goes, he'll sort it out. What'll be will be. Nothing to worry about.
It'll all sort itself out. That
exactly.
type of,
And then the last character is this bloke called Noah. And now talking on the topic of kind of sensitive guys, Noah is very much the sensitive soul of the group, and he often gets teased a little bit for it, not in a mean-spirited way at first, but he's often kind of viewed as the sensitive one, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
But when things start to sort of go awry, Noah is the one to call it out and notice it, that something is off. But even then, because this story as well is about not just about honesty, but about growing up. They're all in their early 20s. They think that they're becoming an adult. They're thinking that they're at that stage of, I'm finding out who I am. But the truth is they're a long way from kind of that point of emotional maturity.
Yeah.
And Noah will look at some of the problems that are happening and take it at face value and say, this is the problem. For example, we're going on a night out. Logan's gambling too much. The solution, we need to tell him to stop gambling, and not thinking about what's happening underneath. Why is he engaging in that sort of escapist behaviour? These were kind of the 4 characters that I started with, and they just bounced off each other really well. And the story kind of grew from how these characters interacted with each other and what they would say to each other, but more specifically what they would struggle to say to each other. There's a lot of periods in the book where there was just feels like dead airspace between them, like they want to try and communicate something and they just can't.
Yeah.
There's just...
And they're leaving what isn't said, trying to it's so well done.
Yeah.
You can see them really struggling because they don't want to come out and ask.
And it's interesting you mentioned it on the topic of, girls who just do this. So early, kind of midway through the story, there's a female character who emerges by the name of Louise, who becomes involved with Chris a bit. And writing her was probably the most interesting character in the entire book, even though it is a book about how men talk to each other. Just the common sense nature of some of her solutions of, you haven't spoken to him in a while, give him a call, talk to him, tackle the problem head on. Almost to the point of there's this thing about how when you get a partner, you worry that if you're involved with someone, you have to be almost like a mothering them a bit, even though you're the same age.
Yeah.
It's that kind of...
Mine have said, they're raising their husbands as well.
Exactly. It's kind of touches on that, and it was really fun writing this Louise character, because the more I was reading it, I was just like, God, this is just common sense stuff.
Yeah.
And whether it's the way that we're brought up or not, whatever we're doing with girls, that they just know how to do it. They just do it. And there is so much that blokes can learn from that in terms of just being able to approach a topic head on.
Yeah.
In an open and honest and positive way.
Absolutely. Yeah. But do you want to tell us a little bit, sorry, is it okay if I just ask, about your background? You were very much involved in rugby union, I think?
Yeah, I've had a very strange kind of trajectory when it comes to publishing in the world of writing and journalism. I started as kind of a rugby journalist in that world, in that space.
Your whole family, I think, are writers, aren't they?
Both my parents are journalists. My father is still a practicing journalist for the Financial Review. My mum now runs a horse adjustment property in Southern Highlands, which is where I grew up. I just grew up in a household of writers, so I would just spend all of my time looking at what Dad was doing, how he'd tell a story and go, well, what's he doing now? I want to kind of try and follow that and do this, that, and the other. And at the age of 7, I would be trying to write columns. Like, I have nothing to write, nothing to talk about. I would just try and write 50 words and go, oh wow, I wrote a column like my dad did, and then it became okay. Well, now let's see how I can tell stories at a young age, which was a lot of fun. But I was a writer. I kind of started in rugby journalism because that was an interest that I had in, and kind of from that I kind of branched out into music journalism and all other sorts of journalism. Getting a job in journalism these days is extremely difficult. Often, quite all-consuming in terms of the work, the back-to-back work that you have to do and things around that. But then, in terms of this particular book, I was working at a job in Belrose, and I wasn't exactly happy with where I was and where I wanted to be, and this was not the direction I wanted to go in life. And I would just turn to this book, this story that had been sitting with me for a couple of years, and would just write 500 words every day. It's essentially what happened. And it became, my escape. This book kind of
became... It's funny how you just always know. I think you know when you're in the wrong direction, and you know what will make you happy and lead you back on.
So you do a job that you hate, and then I'd get to the end of the day and I'd reward myself by writing 500 words, which would take, sometimes it would take 10 minutes, sometimes it would take half an hour, because that's the world of writer's block that you occasionally have. And then in a few months I had a book. And that book kind of came out as a first edition in 2019, and then it sold out quite quickly.
Yeah.
But then I actually managed to land a job in the industry as a result of having put that book out.
All right.
Which was where I landed a job at Booktopia, running their social media and stuff. And I had done a bit of work with, in social media, but I wouldn't have called myself an expert. But they just said, we just like someone who is passionate about books. And you have literally put a book out and done this, that, and the other, and we love that. We want to see you learn more about this industry. So please come on. And of course, the first couple of weeks, I don't want to say, oh, I have a book out, by the way. Like, can we promote it or whatever? You're just like, no, I want to put my head down and just be a good employee and work. And then one day, the deputy CEO kind of came up to me, sat down. We were having a drink at the pub, and he said, "You've got a book." And I was like, "Yes, I do." And he goes, "Why haven't you told us about it?" It's like, because I didn't want it to, I didn't want it to be the dominant, didn't want it to be the dominant reason why I'm here. And he goes, "Why aren't we distributing it?" And then that became. And then,
so had you self-published it then?
Yeah, so originally I'd self-published. So I kind of took the self-publishing route that a lot of authors in these days take. I think there is a definite stigma changing around self-publishing, which I think is really positive.
I like the way they call it indie publishing now. I think it's so much cooler.
It is so funny chatting with people in the industry around, custom publishing or self-publishing. In the past, there was a bit of a stigma around it, because, obviously something that is all done yourself can have a variance in quality, depending on who you have. But these days, I think, considering there are more stories out there than ever that need to be told, and the traditional publishing routes, you can only pick up so many books in so many places. People are wanting to take their destiny into their own hands with their stories, and I think that's something that should be encouraged.
Yeah. I think it's a great way to keep in control, I think, and really, watch it every step of the way. That must be incredible to birth your book, I guess. Like, to watch it from the idea right up to, like, hand selling it to people must just be incredible, but must also be nice just to get the ideas and leave the selling to somebody else.
It's a very strange experience doing the whole thing from start to finish. Whenever I've done author signings or events, it's actually the question that I get asked about more than the book, which is like, how did you do this? I have this story in my head and I don't know where to begin. How do you do this? How did you do this entire process from start to finish? I decided actually to do a podcast on it. I did a podcast kind of talking with people in the industry about this is the entire process of writing your book, getting a publishing deal if you want one, getting an editor, doing design work, getting it out there into bookstores, doing things like this. There are a lot of options out there. I think the traditional route isn't the only route. Absolutely.
But it also, the quality varies considerably. Like, I've had people drop off their books and say, I don't know what. And like their office work stapled together and there's a zillion and one, and it's not even a first draft, it's like half of a draft.
there is, I think there's with self-publishing ones, there is a lot more options out there to actually make your product better.
Yeah.
As well. If you're, the biggest impact that it had on my book was actually getting a professional editor to have a look at it.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, they are essentially your first reader, and they can offer you so much.
Oh, there's so much that you don't see yourself. But so we've talked about the themes very well. I think the toxic masculinity is definitely one that's there as well, though, which is a good one for these times. I think there's so much to be said for just keeping it real and having a genuine conversation versus keeping up with the Joneses. But did you try to set it elsewhere, because it's such a Sydney story as well? It must have been.
I do like Australian stories.
Yeah, I do too.
I like Australian stories. I think there is some sort of cultural cringe for some people, but I think that should change, in all honesty, because there's so many great stories out there that we have here in Australia. For me, it was always going to be a Sydney-centric story.
Yeah.
Just because, even though the topics themselves, even though the topics themselves around, the struggles that men's mental health have aren't isolated to.
Oh, of course not.
It's not isolated. It's not an Australian. It's not an Australian only
and it's
problem.
not a big city thing versus a town thing. So
Yeah.
Oh, good. Should stay and hear the chat.
Drops off books and disappears.
I mean, but it just felt right to set the story here in Sydney.
Yeah.
It is interesting, the response I've had to the book. I mean, the vast majority of the books have been sold here in Australia, but a lot of people have bought it from overseas, and they have still been able to actually connect to the book
of course. Yeah.
quite well. It works better. I think it has worked better if those people had for a time lived in Sydney.
Yeah.
As well, because there's often a personal connection or an element to the city that you lived in or used to live in.
Yeah.
But I always hope that the actual themes of the story will push through.
Unfortunately. Yeah.
There has been a lot of talk about how the language of the characters themselves, very that sort of
Yeah.
go out on beers, kind of Australian language, is
it? It couldn't be set anywhere else. These are Australian characters. But do you think that was one of my things? Do you think it will be picked up by schools? Is that one of your goals for it?
I would love. It's interesting. A lot of people have said that they think it should be picked up by schools. It's difficult to get into. It's difficult to get books like that into schools. But I always hope that if the book can help people out, that's actually more of a reward to me than selling books. So for context, I'm actually wearing this T-shirt here, which is Livin', which is a charity that I have partnered with for this book. So 10% of all the books of my earnings actually go to the charity. It's a charity that was founded on the Sunshine Coast by a gentleman called Sam Webb after one of his closest friends took his life a few years ago. And the charity essentially aims to kind of break the stigma around mental health. That's the kind of the goal, to basically make mental health a much more relatable, open, honest topic. Treat it like normal health, like physical injury.
I know.
You'll have that open discussion about that. It's exactly the same thing. So they do things like going into schools, doing training programs, even activewear that like I'm wearing right now. So they have a hashtag, which is "It Ain't Weak to Speak," which goes all over the place.
Yeah.
It travels everywhere. So basically, every book that I sell, a percentage of it goes to their schools programs to help get into more schools and talk to children about that space. But the thing that has, kind of going back to that topic, I know they've told me that they've had 3 or 4 people reach out to them since this book came out, saying that they read this book and then actively went and sought help after reading it, which is the best compliment I can get. That's the best compliment you can have. That's better than any book sold or anyone equivalent, because they have seen that book and it's led to a positive impact for them and actually made them go, hey, you know what, life is definitely worth it. Which is, I think, the best thing ever.
And I think, like, you probably, I can imagine that you feel very alone and that you don't realise that other people are feeling this way. And I think there's a real thing where you can't ask for help. And God, like, if you just knew that the person that you were talking to was struggling, there's so much help at hand. And I don't think, like, I just think it must just be horrible to feel that isolated and that sad. It must be horrible, but...
It's often, whenever people have got to that stage, and I first of all, I will put a disclaimer that I am not a medical healthcare professional, and obviously that was...
I meant to do that at the start. So.
Yeah. I'm not a medical healthcare professional. I obviously seek a lot of assistance and help in terms of the actual presentation of mental health, because it's important that you get that sort of thing right,
that you get it right
in a book like this, because if you don't, it can actually be quite harmful to someone who might be going through those problems when reading the book. But
so we're going back to Anna's question, going into schools. So what age readership would you be looking at?
Year 11 and 12, I reckon.
yeah,
Well, they wouldn't be able to do it in 12 because of the curriculum, I'd say, but year 11.
And the language is very strong for
occasionally, yes.
Yeah, so have you approached any schools?
I haven't. No, not yet. I have actually had a couple of conversations with a lot of with mental health groups. Has kind of been a place to start, and had a lot I know there are quite a few that are interested, at least in terms of actually using the book and discussing it. In terms of a capacity like that. So there's been a lot of mental health groups that have been interested. Schools, it's a bit more difficult because obviously they have to follow a certain curriculum and certain things like that.
Year 11.
Yeah, it would definitely be a
If
later year.
If they had a group which was following, we used to have one called, do you remember the Out There program? Were you there for that? It started when you might have been in year 12. We started for the year 11s under year, and they followed a different curriculum because we knew that these kids didn't need a HSC, but they weren't mature enough to leave school either to go and get jobs. So it was a guided one to get
I love
them
the way
into
they do
take.
it now. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't.
There's so
Graham
much more
Dawes,
vocational and...
Yeah, Graham Dawes, you remember him in IA?
Yes.
Yeah, he read it with us.
Oh.
Yeah. So it was a particular group of kids that were chosen, and that's something that they could do, and they do exist in schools.
Yeah.
They do exist.
I
It's
think
just
it would
what
be brilliant
schools-
for those kids, and probably brilliant for every kid. This, I think.
I do know that obviously you can reach out to independent schools. If anyone knows any, by the way, I'd be very open to reach out to them.
I know one.
But yeah, I have had a lot of success with with mental health groups.
Yeah.
A lot of them have kind of expressed an interest in.
I'm sure once you're in, then you're in with all of them, wouldn't you be? Like with schools, but
Yeah.
this for me was on par with the Momentum man, Will Kostakis?
Yeah, Will
Is that it?
Kostakis. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, like this is it's just so important for our...
I'm flattered.
No,
Thank you.
I
Your person
loved
Will's
it.
great.
I wouldn't have let you come in.
Shucks.
Invited you if I didn't think it was great, but it is, and it's so important and so great and so in need for now. I think, like, I'm sure everybody's probably already heard me say, but like, we've known 4 people who've committed suicide through my career at the shop. All of them were men. I would have bent over backwards to help any of them. I didn't know that any one of them was struggling like they were. And I just think, like, that's so crazy. So you can know what somebody's regular coffee order is, but you can't know that they're not okay. Like, it's just really... One was 19 and the other ones were late 30s, early 30s and early 60s. Yeah.
We had a couple at school.
Yeah.
Very tough. Yeah. Would you say 15 to 16-year-old boys? I haven't read it because that would be the year 10 group, and that would be their curriculum's a bit different. They've got more chance of doing different things.
The book does kind of touch on some very strong themes near the end. So normally the response that I've kind of seen is that the kind of from the 17, 18 age bracket upwards has often been the people who kind of best.
And it doesn't have to be done at school either. This is just, I just think it's a real shame that we can learn bloody Pythagoras, but we can't learn mental health. It's so silly.
But I do think that there is a kind of going back to kind of where we started, that there, in terms of change happening, what I think has been great in terms of putting this book together is that often a single conversation can actually make a huge amount of difference. Just a very simple conversation about that. And often if you find yourself in that position, it's just the listening is all that person needs.
Yeah.
Even if you can't do anything for them.
Yeah.
Just the chance to actually just, they speak and you listen.
What about parenting groups?
I have heard a lot of parents actually be interested in this. A lot of it's interesting. A lot of when it comes to parents and stuff, it's either the people who've either bought it are, wives looking to get their husbands to read it.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting, or which is the vast majority of.
And then that would help also the fathers with their children.
Correct. Yeah. Same, and that's the other one, which is fathers or mothers looking to,
Looks like I've got to read this book, doesn't it?
Sorry.
I used to only read scientific journals. I've come a long way, haven't I?
Well, I think this is one for the wondering women as well. I just think it's just so important. It's such a good book. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, what were you going to say earlier about your...
Going to say, John and I are in our mid-70s, and post-war and austerity and young people, children's feelings weren't even in that mix. Nothing.
I think that depends though upon, as I said, your family. Okay, so I'm a bit younger than you, not much, but my brother's in his mid-70s, and our father had come here as a refugee from war-torn Europe after the First World War on a boat, no papers, and I think that may have been why we had a different. Our feelings and thoughts were very important in that family.
Well, ours was the Second World War and the same thing, only we had papers, but it was just the way things were.
Well, men then weren't able to, when they came back from war, they weren't even allowed to talk about it. It's still happening now.
I know.
When they've been in a conflict area, they're not allowed to talk about it.
So it's taken a lot of generations for that to unravel.
Yeah.
It's
And
also
that's somewhere where the book could go, maybe to the defence.
a lot of veterans. It's
100%.
It's funny you mention that, because there is one character that talks about that military background, and it is amazing how I think a lot of the struggles that men have had whenever they've come back from war is, one, the adjustment to civilian life is so completely drastic that it's like you just can't identify with that space.
Go to APSA down in Canberra, approach them.
But
Royal Military College, go down there and approach them, because that's most probably where it could go, because they really are lost. And then when they go then into civilian life, as you're saying, after they leave Defence Force, they have no idea how to work with people who have different backgrounds to them.
My brother was in the army and he did 5 years because he couldn't get into the police. They said that would be a good way to get into the police force. Thank goodness he doesn't even want to join the police anymore. He's a social worker. But afterwards, he couldn't even pay the rent. He had no idea how much it took it cost to live. Like they do everything for them, and I think probably deliberately, so they have to stay.
Yeah.
Maybe, but then those who then, as I said, as they become civilians and they go working in the defence industry, because, like myself, I may be working there and I haven't been working or gone through a military college, so I'm treated very different, and then particularly I'm a female, but maybe it's primarily I'm a female, but that's good at ACFA.
We used to have a charity that used to meet here for coffees. I can't remember what they called, but they would definitely, they would just, something about mates and nobody gets left behind, and it's for returned veterans.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
And absolutely.
Yeah, charities are an interesting one, because I've reached out to a lot of charities and a lot of being able to help out, but often charities and NGOs are often very limited in terms of their resources. And in terms of what they can do. So they can't just do a book club willy-nilly. But it is, I absolutely agree. When every single person who's kind of come from that perspective and interacted with that book, has interacted with the book, has said that it's
So the police academy, the defence academy, that would be a start.
But it's also like the mums and the sisters and the siblings of people who work in that field. Like it's so important to talk. I think and this is
But it is
just another example of how important it is.
ABC in the morning talk about it a lot, which is good.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, but yet I still saw that dad with his son saying, man up, don't be a baby. Oh,
No, that's not the way to go, is it?
no,
That's how we grew up.
yeah,
And yet a man in war wouldn't say that to his mate.
no,
They would get in there and help, yeah.
yeah, no. Can I quickly ask about the cover, and then that's it, me done. I just love the cover.
Oh yes, thank you. Yes, it's there's been many versions of this cover. I was very lucky to have teamed up with the team who are the publishing arm of Booktopia, which is Brio Books. Brio are a very established publishing arm even before they kind of joined the Booktopia team. And the designer of this one is a gentleman named Roy Chen, and he.
Oh, I think I do like his.
He's done a lot of
I've heard the
fantastic
name,
books.
yeah.
So Roy has a lot in terms of people who that Brio have been involved with. It includes like Daniel Davis Wood. Another one would be a lot of the books that Adam Spencer has done. Dr. Carl. They've done a lot of quite high profile books.
Yeah.
There's a lot of very high profile authors, and all of them are actually escaping me at the moment,
I know,
which I know is quite frustrating.
Yeah.
But they
There's a really good author who's just had all of her books re-released with new covers,
Yes.
and I think that's him who did.
yes, that's right.
I cannot think of her name, of course.
But it's sometimes I think. Well, first of all, with the title was like picked from 100. I think it was 150 titles. You just need something that nails it in one go, and often finding a title can be more difficult than some writing sections of the book. But just capturing that feeling, the need of honesty. I feel like he did a great job, didn't he? He did a great job. So, even I didn't have.
Yeah.
Often I'd present a couple of ideas, and then a designer will go away and make it 10 times better.
Yeah.
And less is more. I think it's.
Well, I knew that I wanted to read it after listening to probably your podcast episode when you talk about it.
Oh yeah.
But, so I knew that I wanted it even before the cover, but the cover definitely hyped it up on it to be read by all.
Thank you very much.
Made me desperate to read it. It's so so intriguing a cover. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes. All right, happy? Are we all okay?
Can I just ask, do you have anything else in the pipeline?
Yes, I do.
Oh, I advertise that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a second book coming out. So a lot of people have asked me, is there going to be a sequel to this? And I only really want to continue a story if I genuinely think that there is something there, and there was something about this particular book that it ended in the right place. And there is a good
I
kind of standalone.
There being a sequel for it.
Yeah, I do. I actually have got a small short story coming out
Oh.
which is kind of a little coda to this book.
Oh.
Which I'm kind of currently in the process of putting together and hopefully getting out there into the world. But I am writing a second book, and I'm going to kind of do a trilogy, but kind of a trilogy of Australian standalone stories, of which this will be the first one. And there is another one that is happening it's kind of set in the country, which is where I grew up. And tentatively it's set just before the Black Summer. And it's kind of a story of a woman going home when her mother is dying. And it's kind of a story that touches on the topic of kind of not forgetting where you come from, but also on the topic of life and death and that space. And particularly that in this day and age you shouldn't be afraid of death. And it's something that particularly for a lot of people in my generation, they don't think about this topic at all. And very often, when they do, they're completely terrified of it. And I think there's an argument to be made that the sooner that you come to terms with the concept of death and accept that it is...
At our age, we're terrified of it.
But the sooner you come to terms with it, the more suddenly everything in life has value.
I think the more people like you that write about things to normalise them, the better.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's an amazing book that's actually come out recently on this particular topic called Mortals, which is a non-fiction book that examines how death, for example, is viewed within our society, and how a lot of the actual societal problems that we have in the world right now are occur because people have an intrinsic fear of death and not
It's
achieving.
written by a father and a daughter.
Father,
isn't it?
daughter,
Yeah.
the names of them again escape me, which
It's
is
like
very
Ross
frustrating.
and Rachel.
Correct.
It's
It's a
funny.
Ross,
Yeah.
Ross and Rachel Menzies. That's who it is.
That's it.
Thank you. I know. Whenever I hear Ross and Rachel, I just think this is what I don't. Yeah, Friends references. I know. But yeah, they do a fantastic book, which was recommended by like Julian Morrow from The Chaser and a whole bunch of ABC readers as well. Basically, a fantastic book examining about how if you come to terms with death, then it leads to you having a much better life.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the next one that's coming
I
up
think
at
it
the
just happens.
moment.
And how soon will you see it come out?
I'm hoping
No,
to.
I'm desperate to read it now.
I'm hoping to have it out probably this time next year. We always say we want to have it out at a certain time, and then the time comes, and you're often like still scribbling away at it like crazy. But you always you hope for. I'm aiming for next year. I'm a decent way into it at the moment, so fingers crossed. Should be good.
Oh, so
Interesting.
good. Yeah.
Mm.
Keep writing.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so sorry that not more people could come, but
That's all right. Thank you for having me.
You'll have to do a Wandering Women one,
Yeah.
and then we'll have a lot of people. Will,
absolutely. Yeah.
do you live very far, or
I live in Waverton, or around North Sydney way, but I'll always come
you
here.
came across the bridges
I came across the bridges. And
to see the Shire,
Absolutely.
God's country.
I like the Shire. I love the Shire. As long as it's not man.
So, okay, yeah, we'll have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's such an important book. I think it's a great one for everybody. Like a great one for book clubs, a great one to buddy read, a great one just to read in general. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure chatting with you all. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Dick.